CEO of the company that he's still running right now. And I actually won. I crushed him. I beat him. I took the award, I put it in my pocket, and I flaunted it in his face for 8 years. And here I am doing it again. Take that, Paul.
You're the man, Rob.
Yeah, exactly. So let me explain how these last 8 years have gone then, all right? So now Paul is the CEO, he's the founder of a very impressive company that creates the world's smallest DNA analyzer, and he's gonna talk about that, I'm sure, but he's also he's a doctor, he's an entrepreneur, he's an author. In fact, I think the day with the award show, he had just launched his book. And he started this company, this local group here in Ottawa, which as you graduate through this and you want to become an entrepreneur, I strongly suggest you look at it. It's called Fresh Founders, where it's a networking environment, like a free of any judgment networking environment for aspiring and successful entrepreneurs. And he started with a bunch of the guys that you know, like Toby and Harley and the core nucleus of this next generation of entrepreneur. So that is what Paul has done. And I am on stage at an event on a Saturday not getting paid as your MC. So you can be the judge of who is deserving of that award. I would like to introduce to you the real award winner in Paul Lem for the next presentation. Put it together for
Thanks so much, Rob. So Rob is the wise old guy of Ottawa. He is so wise. We go to him to figure what we should do with our lives. Okay, so I'm the CEO and founder of Spartan Bioscience. As Rob mentioned, I'm also a medical doctor. Every day in medicine, we see chest x-rays like this. Completely normal. The lungs are clear. And so I was really shocked when one day I saw this chest x-ray. This is completely abnormal. Look at all those fluffy things in this person's lungs. We call it a snowstorm. So the story is, this guy was from up north. He was coughing up blood. He got airlifted to us here in Ottawa, and we saw him and we saw this chest x-ray. The diagnosis is end-stage tuberculosis. Really, really bad. His lungs are destroyed. So when I saw patients like this, it makes me really upset. Like it makes me angry. Because if he were in the city, his tuberculosis would never have gotten to this point, to where he's coughing up blood and that's when we see him. We would have got to him way earlier and he would have been fine. But because he's up north, he doesn't have access to that care. You know, you don't have the nurses, the doctors, you don't have the diagnostic testing. It was cases like this that made me realize the power of entrepreneurship. Because as a doctor, I can only see one patient at a time. Even if I move up north and I see patients up north my entire career, it's a limited number of people I can see. Whereas as an entrepreneur, you can create that product and you can scale it up and reach millions of people. And so for tuberculosis, you can create a product that can actually diagnose it early. And what we've done at Spartan Bioscience is not just things like tuberculosis, but infectious disease. We spent years and years of research and development. So this is why Rob is saying it's been like more than 8 years, more than 10 years now. We've had this team of scientists, engineers, programmers building this box. So it fits in the palm of your hand. It's the world's smallest DNA analyzer. And the reason DNA is really, really important is because it's in every living thing in this planet. It's in you. And so when you can take a DNA sample, you can then diagnose things like tuberculosis, because you can look for tuberculosis DNA, which should never be in your lungs. Or you can test your own DNA and figure out what drugs should you actually be taking. Or you can test your food and water. It's kind of like a Sony PlayStation. You got one box and you plug in different tests. So this is what we've been working on at Spartan. Let's get back to the present. So I look out at this audience. There's hundreds of people here. I know you want to do work that's amazing, really meaningful work. Rob and I had a conversation a few months ago where we were talking about when we're 80 years old, when you're 80 years old, you want to look back and say, I spent those best years of my life doing work worth doing. For this talk, I was thinking to myself, what is the most valuable information I can give you so that you can do the absolute best work of your life? So when I thought about it, I came down to, I think there's 2 big secrets I can share with you that will really increase your probability of success. Before I get into those secrets, I want to give you a sense of how I figured it out. So when I started off as an entrepreneur, I had spent my entire life preparing to get into med school. You know how it is. You're in high school, you study all the time, you take all these tests, then you go to university, you fight it out with hundreds of other kids who all want to get into med school. When you finally get into med school, you're thrown right into these crazy rotations where you have to go from like neurosurgery 1 month to family medicine the other. It's really intense. And how do you figure out how to make these life-changing, life or death decisions for your patients? Because it's the highest stakes. You know, when you're an entrepreneur, it's maybe you go bankrupt. It's about the worst thing that can happen. But when you're a doctor, if you screw up, people die. So what we learn in medical school is you have to find the best evidence for whatever it is you want to achieve. And so for entrepreneurship, I decided to apply my medical training and figure out what's the best evidence for becoming an amazing entrepreneur. And it turns out there are 2 secrets. And the first one is shared by these 3 companies. Now these 3 companies are pretty different. So you heard from Toby Lutke earlier today. So Shopify, online e-commerce platform. I think this year, almost 400,000 merchants will use them. They'll do almost 400 million in revenues. They weren't always so big. So I actually knew Toby back when he was still in his in-law's basement. And I've watched him over the years grow it all the way up. And it's a similar story for Khan Academy. So I think we've all logged in there. Salman Khan, he starts off posting these educational tutorial videos for his nephews onto YouTube. And then year after year, it just explodes and becomes humongous. And I think this year, they'll have served 1 billion videos, and 40 million students will log in every month. Same story for Spartan. So I started this company out of my apartment, and we've grown it, and now this year we will ship to some of the world's top hospitals like Mayo Clinic. All 3 of these really different businesses. So what is it that we all share in common? I can tell you we all share the same business strategy. So what is that? It's this strategy called new market disruptive innovation. Okay, so I'm guessing everyone in this audience, you've all heard about disruption, right? Raise your hand if you've heard of Uber is going to disrupt the taxi industry. Yeah, you all want to disrupt every industry. And so what does disruption actually mean? So what it actually means is this. Take an existing technology and bring it to a new market of users. So existing technology, that means you don't have to invent anything new. It's already existing. And then a new market of users, this is people who have never used this thing before, like who have never done that thing before. So let's go revisit our 3 company examples. So Shopify. So back in the day, if you wanted to sell your baseball cards, you had choices like maybe eBay, Amazon. It was pretty difficult. Like, there was no way my mom could set up her own online store. And what Toby and his team did is they made it super simple, where you could just take your stuff, create a store for candy or baseball cards, just stick it up, in a few minutes you had your own Shopify store. And so suddenly everyone in the world could become their own merchant. Khan Academy. So before Khan Academy, you had to have a rich mom or dad who would buy a tutor for you and then give you those private lessons. But now with Khan Academy, you just log on online, it's free, you can go through all of these tutorials at your own time. And it's the same thing for Spartan. So before us, it was all about mainframe DNA analyzers in hospital labs. So you need a PhD, it's some big piece of equipment the size of the couch, costs hundreds of thousands of dollars. Not accessible to people. But with ours, size of a coffee cup fits in the palm of your hand, so easy my mom can do it. Now it suddenly becomes accessible. And so you can see what unites all of our companies is this strategy of, you can think of it as like democratizing technology. And so with Spartan, you think back to that tuberculosis example. With those little boxes, we can ship those all around the world. Suddenly, remote northern communities can actually have this box, anyone can run it, and then you could diagnose things like tuberculosis or other infectious diseases. Okay, so next question is, why does this disruptive innovation strategy, why does it work? Why is it better than all these other strategies that you could do? So it turns out that when you're an entrepreneur, there's two big risks you got to take on. So one is technical risk, and the other one is market risk. And so by taking existing technology, by definition, you're not taking on that technical risk because it already exists. Again, think back to Toby and Shopify. He's not inventing online e-commerce. He's taking code that already exists, Ruby on Rails, and just taking it and making an existing online store, but making it really easy. New market of users. So you are taking on a bit of risk by going after people who have never used it before because you don't know if they actually want it. But what you're really saving yourself is that risk of not having to go head-to-head against the big companies. So I'll give you an example. For Spartan, we're the first company that's bringing DNA testing to pharmacists in pharmacies. Before us, there's no way that a pharmacist could actually do any sort of DNA test. So we're not competing against anyone because no one is worried if we sign up, another 100 pharmacists because they're not selling to them. Whereas if we had gone after hospitals where the big companies are selling, then we would be on their radar much faster. So by going after a market of new users, this lets you scale for so many years under the radar until you become so big that no one can take you down. Okay, so I've talked about the first big secret. It's this disruptive innovation strategy. So pick that existing technology, go after a new market of users. The next step is, what can you do in your everyday life? Like, what can you do right after this conference to massively improve your odds? So again, back to my medical training, I went through thousands of research articles, read hundreds of books, and distilled it all down to a daily system of habits. So how many people have read this book? Okay, we have a few people, not that many. So I highly recommend after this conference, go and read this book. And the reason it's important is because it's all about habits. Habits are things that you do all the time that have a trigger. So it's almost like, let's say you have the habit of exercising. So your trigger might be you see your running shoes, and it triggers you to do this habit of exercising. So as Charles Duhigg, the author, New York Times reporter, he explains that habits are really important because once something becomes a habit, you no longer have to think about it. It no longer takes willpower to do it, which means you can now save that willpower and brain power to solve the big problems of your world-changing idea. So an example would be New Year's resolutions. We've all made them. Imagine you make this New Year's resolution to go exercise. Week 1, you're really fired up, you're exercising all the time, but by the time it's week 2 and 3, your willpower kind of goes down, and then you fall off the wagon. Whereas, let's say you have the habit of brushing your teeth. I can tell you I brush my teeth twice a day, I do it all the time. I no longer have to think about it. In fact, if I don't brush my teeth, it actually feels weird, it makes me go brush my teeth. So that's the power of habits. All right, so what habits should you actually do every day in your life? Here they are. There are 8 of them, backed by hundreds of scientific research articles because I'm a huge science nerd. The really cool thing is you can do even just one of these habits and it'll massively improve your life. So let's dive into each one. Exercise. I'm sure your doctor has told you or everyone's told you exercise is really important. And I can tell you the research shows the research is massively overwhelming. This makes a huge difference. Everything from your health to how clear